The laughter came first, sharp, cutting through the quiet of a small-town gas station. A group of men circled a rusted old truck, mocking every dent, every patch of faded paint. Inside the cab, a humble farmer gripped the wheel, shame burning his cheeks. What no one knew, thunder was coming. Before we start today's story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Also, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us to bring you more inspiring stories every day. Ethan Cole had never owned much. His father left him a patch of stubborn land, an old Chevy pickup from the 70s, and a work ethic carved into bone. At 38, he wore calloused hands like second skin. Days began before sunrise, with tractors coughing smoke and cows waiting in dew-soaked fields. The truck was his lifeline, hauling feed, carrying tools, and sometimes, when storms ruined crops, serving as shelter. But to others in town it was a joke. Gleaming SUVs and shiny new Fords parked outside the diner made Ethan's Chevy look like junkyard scrap. He didn't care much until people started laughing. That Saturday, pulling into the station, Ethan heard it clearly, mocking voices, young and loud. "Man, that thing belongs in a museum," another snorted. Ethan's ears burned, shame lodging in his throat. He filled his tank slowly, praying silence would swallow their voices. But ridicule cuts deeper when spoken to, break a man's dignity. The ringleader was Travis, a contractor's son who'd never worked a field in his life. He leaned against his spotless Ram truck, smirking as Ethan tried to keep his head down. "How's that heap still running, Cole? You keep it alive with duct tape and prayers?" The men laughed harder. Ethan said nothing. Silence was safer. He finished pumping gas, his eyes fixed on the numbers, but his hands trembled. Humiliation spread through him, heavier than the rust on the fenders. As he climbed into the cab, Travis banged the side, leaving a muddy handprint. "Careful, Ethan, that door might fall right off." The group roared. Ethan drove away slowly, dust rising behind him, heart pounding with a mixture of shame and quiet rage. Out the window, the world blurred, fields, barns, sky. Inside, his soul ached. It wasn't just a truck. It was his father's memory, his only inheritance, the last thing connecting him to family roots. Back on the farm, Ethan parked by the barn and sat for a while, staring at the truck. The paint was peeling, yes. Rust ate at the doors. The windshield had a crack running like a scar across the glass. But the engine still breathed steady. He remembered riding beside his father in the same seat, their Sunday ritual of driving into town for ice cream. His father's laugh, the smell of oil and hay. It all lived in that Chevy. Now, strangers mocked it, like it was trash. Ethan rested, his forehead against the steering wheel, swallowing hard. The farm around him was quiet, except for the cluck of hens. He wanted to scream. Instead, he whispered, "Don't you quit on me now." His fingers brushed the cracked steering wheel. He didn't know it yet, but others, men bound by a code older than shiny trucks or shallow laughter, would hear his unspoken plea before the sunset. Evening stretched across the fields, long shadows falling. Ethan tried to lose himself in chores, mending a fence, feeding livestock, but the sting of mockery clung like a burr. By dusk, he was in the barn, changing oil on the tractor, when the faint hum of engines stirred the air. At first, he thought it was the highway carrying sound, but then the rumble grew closer, heavier, layered, a chorus of machines breathing as one. Ethan stepped outside, wiping grease from his hands. The dirt road shimmered with headlights. One after another, motorcycles emerged from the horizon, their chrome glinting under the fading sun. 30 of them, riding 2 by 2, thunder rolling like an approaching storm. Ethan's breath caught. His neighbors peeked through curtains, porch lights flicking on. The convoy slowed as it reached his driveway, each bike pulling in, forming a long unbroken line. Leather vests caught the last of the daylight, patches bold, Hell's Angels, engines idled, shaking the ground. The sight was surreal. 30 motorcycles filling Ethan's driveway, lined shoulder to shoulder like an armored wall. Dust swirled, headlights cutting through twilight. Ethan stood frozen, unsure if he should run, wave, or hide. Then one rider killed his engine, pulling off his helmet. Broad-shouldered, weathered, with a grey streak in his beard, he dismounted. His boots crunched gravel as he walked toward Ethan. The others followed suit, silent but watchful. Ethan's heart hammered. Finally the man spoke, his voice low but steady. "You Ethan Cole?" Ethan nodded cautiously. The man extended a hand. "Name's Ryder Kane. Heard some folks gave you grief about your truck." Ethan blinked, stunned. How do you know?" Ryder's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Word travels. Brothers listen." Behind him the bikers remained still, their presence louder than thunder. Ethan realized something. This wasn't a threat. This was a stand. Ethan shook Ryder's hand, calloused skin meeting calloused skin. There was no weakness in Ryder's grip, only assurance. "We don't like bullies," Ryder said simply. "And we don't like when a man's pride gets trampled for what he drives." Ethan stammered, "But it's just an old truck." Ryder's eyes softened. "A man's truck ain't just metal. It's memory. It's history. And nobody laughs at that." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to protest, to say he wasn't worth their trouble, but before he could, another biker, tattooed arms glinting, walked up and patted the hood of the Chevy. "She's got more soul than all those shiny toys downtown," he said with a grin. Laughter rippled through the group, not cruel but approving. Ethan realized they weren't here to mock him. They were here to honor him. For the first time that day, warmth spread in his chest, outshining shame. Neighbors gathered by fences, whispering. The sight of 30 Hell's Angels parked in a farmer's driveway was something they'd talk about for years. Ethan stood beside his truck, the bikers forming a half-circle around it. Ryder spoke loud enough for all to hear. "People laugh at rust because they don't understand what it means. Rust means years. Rust means endurance. Rust means a story that didn't quit." The angels nodded, some folding arms, others leaning, against bikes. Ethan's eyes stung. He'd spent his life keeping his head low, ashamed of not measuring up. Now men feared across states were standing in his yard, defending his dignity. A younger angel with fiery red hair added, "Besides, this old Chevy'll outlast most of those shiny rigs once they start showing their fur scratches." The men chuckled. Ethan almost laughed too, but the lump in his throat was too heavy. Instead he whispered, "Thank you." The angels didn't just stop at words. One by one they circled the truck, inspecting dents, patting the hood, sharing stories of their own rides that had carried them through decades. Ethan watched in awe as rough, hardened men treated his rusted Chevy like a sacred relic. Ryder leaned against the cab. "Your old man drove this, didn't he?" Ethan's eyes widened. "How did you know?" Ryder shrugged. "You can feel it. Trucks like this. Too many hands on the wheel, too many miles. They're never just one man's." Ethan swallowed hard. "It was his. He died when I was 20. Ryder nodded slowly, eyes heavy with understanding. "Then this ain't a truck. It's your inheritance." Silence fell, heavy and respectful. Ethan looked down, blinking tears away. He had carried shame for years, but now standing in his driveway, surrounded by 30 angels, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, pride. That pride would soon be tested. The following evening, Ethan reluctantly drove into town again. He had chores, supplies he couldn't postpone. As he pulled into the diner's lot, familiar laughter erupted. Travis and his crew were there, leaning on polished vehicles. "Well, well, the rust bucket rides again," Travis crowed. Ethan froze, gripping the wheel. But something had shifted inside him. Instead of lowering his eyes, he lifted his chin. He parked, stepped out, and walked toward the diner. Mocking voices followed. "Careful, don't lean on it, it'll collapse." Ethan kept walking, but inside, unease twisted. Alone, he might have folded. Alone, he might have retreated. But he wasn't alone anymore. He didn't know it yet, but engines were already stirring in the distance, friends rolling closer, ready to stand where dignity was threatened. The laughter swelled as Ethan entered the diner. Heads turned, some sympathetic, others entertained. Travis followed, smirking. "Tell me, Cole, how much duct tape you use this week? Maybe start a GoFundMe to buy yourself a real truck." The crowd chuckled. Ethan clenched his fists, his face flushed, but he didn't answer. He sat in his usual booth, ordered black coffee. He thought he'd endure it in silence, but tonight was different. Outside, the low thunder of engines began, at first faint, then louder, rolling closer, rattling windows. Conversations paused. Travis frowned. Tires screeched as 30 motorcycles pulled into the lot, headlights blazing. The angels dismounted in unison, leather vests gleaming under neon lights. They lined the diner entrance, a wall of unyielding presence. Travis paled. Ethan lifted his coffee cup, hiding the flicker of a smile. He wasn't alone anymore. The diner fell silent as Ryder pushed the door open. His boots echoed against tile. Behind him, angels filled the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Travis shifted, his earlier smirk dissolving. Ryder's gaze found Ethan, then moved to Travis. "You the one laughing?" His voice was calm, but it carried iron. Travis swallowed. It was just a joke." Ryder stepped closer. "Jokes don't break men down. Jokes don't shame what they love. That ain't humor. That's cruelty." He leaned in, voice low enough only Travis heard. "And we don't tolerate cruelty." Travis's face was drained of color. He muttered something, backing away toward the door. His crew followed quickly, silence replacing laughter. The angels didn't touch them. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough. Ethan sat frozen, coffee trembling in his hand. For years he had endured ridicule. Tonight, it ended, with a brotherhood that answered mockery with respect. When the tension broke, the diner buzzed again. But this time all eyes turned not to mock Ethan, but to regard him differently, curiously, respectfully. Ryder sat opposite Ethan, ordering pie and coffee. "You held your ground," he said simply. Ethan shook his head. "I was terrified." Ryder shrugged. "Courage ain't the absence of fear, it's standing anyway." Ethan stared at him, words failing. He had lived his life small, unseen, ashamed. Now strangers who owed him nothing had chosen to defend him. The waitress refilled his cup, her smile gentle. "That old truck of yours just became a legend," she whispered. Ethan's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen, not for what he lacked, but for what he carried. Outside, the Chevy sat under neon lights, rust gleaming like armor. Word spread fast. By the next morning, folks in town whispered about Ethan's driveway lined with motorcycles, about the Diner Showdown. Children pointed at his truck with awe instead of laughter. Some neighbors nodded at him for the first time in years. Ethan didn't know what to do with the attention. He hadn't asked for it. Yet deep inside, something healed. That evening, Ryder and a few angels returned. They didn't speak of the diner. Instead, they rolled up their sleeves. One brought paint, another tools, another polish. "We ain't here to change her," Ryder said, patting the hood. "We're here to honor her." Together they cleaned the truck, buffed rust, tightened bolts, patched what needed patching. Ethan worked alongside them, tears slipping unnoticed. It wasn't about making the truck new. It was about showing it mattered, and for Ethan that was everything. As the sun dipped, the Chevy looked the same, still old, still weathered, but it gleamed with care. Ethan leaned against it, overwhelmed. Ryder lit a cigarette, exhaling slow. Men forget sometimes. Worth ain't measured in shine. It's measured in what lasts. Ethan swallowed hard. Why me? Why now? Ryder studied the horizon. Because too many men walk alone, carrying shame they don't deserve. Sometimes they just need someone to remind them they're not small. Ethan's throat ached with gratitude. He wanted to say more, but silence carried enough. The angels mounted their bikes one by one. Engines roared, headlights piercing dusk. Ryder gave a final nod. Keep driving, Ethan. Don't let anyone make you hang your head. Then they were gone, thunder rolling into the night. Ethan stood by his truck, tears burning, heart lighter than it had been in years. Weeks passed, and the sting of ridicule no longer haunted Ethan. Travis avoided him now, his laughter silenced. Townfolk treated Ethan differently, some with respect, others with quiet envy. Yet Ethan didn't seek recognition. He sought something simpler. Peace. Each morning, he drove the Chevy down dirt roads, windows open, wind carrying memories of his father's voice. Sometimes he'd catch himself smiling. One evening, as he parked at the diner, a boy no older than 10 approached. "Mister, is that your truck?" Ethan nodded, unsure what was coming. The boy's eyes shone. "It's the coolest one here." Ethan's chest swelled. He ruffled the boy's hair, whispering, "Take care of what's yours. Don't let anyone laugh it out of you." The boy grinned and ran off. Ethan sat in his booth, coffee steaming, and for the first time he wasn't invisible. He was a story being told. The angels visited now and then, never announcing, always arriving like storms. Sometimes they rode in for coffee, sometimes just to sit on his porch. They never stayed long, but their presence was enough. One night Ryder sat with Ethan under starlight. "You think your old man's proud?" he asked. Ethan stared at the sky. "I hope so," Ryder nodded. "He is. A man who keeps the land, keeps the wheels turning, keeps dignity even when mocked. That's pride no one can steal." Ethan swallowed, emotion thick in his chest. The two men sat in silence, engines cooling in the distance, stars burning above. For Ethan it was more than companionship. It was belonging, something he had never expected, never sought, but found all the same. Seasons turned. Winter brought frost on the barn windows. Spring brought blossoms across the fields. Through it all, Ethan's truck kept rolling. Rust deepened, but so did Ethan's pride. He stopped seeing dents as shame. He saw them as proof of years endured, of storms survived. One day, he drove to town for supplies. At the counter, the clerk, once dismissive, said quietly, "Your old man's Chevy reminds me of my granddad's. Wish I'd kept it." Ethan nodded, no bitterness in his heart. The world had changed its eyes, not because he had bought something new, but because he had kept something true. He left the store, the Chevy rattling but steady, and smiled as he turned the key. One summer afternoon, Ethan hosted a cookout. Neighbors came, children played in the yard, and the Chevy sat proudly by the barn. As the sun lowered, engines thundered again. The angels arrived, 30 strong, filling the lane. Instead of fear, the town greeted them with nods and respect. Ryder clasped Ethan's shoulder. "Looks like you built more than crops here, brother." "Looks like you built a family." Ethan's eyes misted. "Didn't know I needed one." Ryder grinned. "Nobody does, until it's there." The men joined the cookout, laughter rising, stories traded. For once, Ethan wasn't the man on the edge. He was at the center, surrounded by friendship and loyalty, forged not by wealth but by endurance. Years later, the Chevy still sat in Ethan's driveway, rusted but revered. Children who had once mocked it now pointed with awe, calling it the legend truck. Ethan, now grayer, leaned against it one evening, the sky painted orange. He thought of his father, of long roads, of laughter turned to silence, then restored by engines. He whispered into the breeze, "Still running, Dad." A faint rumble echoed in the distance. Bikes rolling somewhere far, maybe near, maybe not. Ethan smiled. "And I ain't alone." The truck, dented and scarred, seemed to gleam under fading light. Not just a machine, but a monument. Ethan's story wasn't about trucks or bikers. It was about dignity, about standing tall when the world tried to make you small. The rust on his Chevy became a crown, not a curse. The laughter that once stung became silence before respect. And the angels who lined his driveway proved a truth Ethan carried forever. Worth isn't measured in shine, but in soul. That evening, 30 motorcycles had stood for one man's pride, and in doing so reminded a whole town that strength isn't loud. It's steady. And sometimes it rides on rusted wheels that never quit. Sometimes the world will laugh at what you hold dear. But real worth isn't found in polish. It's found in what endures. Ethan's truck carried memory, pride, and love, and Brotherhood answered cruelty with thunder. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe and press the bell for more.